The door creaked open just a little, hesitantly, as if Ed was unsure he even wanted to be there. He shuffled inside, avoiding eye contact, slumping into the chair across from me. I could tell he was carrying a heavy weight, one he was barely able to hold up any longer. "Ed, I'm glad you came," I started, hoping to ease his tension. "How are you feeling today?" He looked down, rubbing his palms together slowly, his lips pressed into a tight line. Moments passed before he finally spoke. "I don't know how I ended up here," he said, almost in a whisper. "I guess I've just messed everything up." Silence settled between us, but it wasn't an empty silence. It felt like the pause before a confession, the prelude to a storm of words that had been locked inside for too long. I waited, knowing that when he was ready, he would find a way to let it all out. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," Ed continued, his voice cracking. "When I met Mary, everything was perfect. She was this amazing, vibrant person. Every time she walked into a room, it felt like she brought light with her, you know. And I got to have that light close to me." His shoulders drooped lower, as if the memory was physically pressing down on him. I nodded, urging him to go on. "We lived in the same building," Ed explained, a faint smile crossing his lips as he remembered. "Just down the hall. I used to see her in the elevator, with these paint stains on her clothes. She was always in a rush, like she was chasing some idea that was about to slip away if she didn't grab it. I liked that about her, how she was so full of life. I wanted to be part of that world, and for a while, I was. We started hanging out, nothing big, just coffee sometimes, talking in the hallway, that kind of thing. But she made me feel like I mattered." His gaze flickered toward the window, where a sliver of gray winter sky was visible. He seemed to be looking for something outside that wasn't there. "But the more time I spent with her," he said, the light in his eyes dimming, the more I felt this need to have her close. I told myself it was just because I loved her. That's what love is, right? Wanting someone near, all the time. Making sure they're safe, that they're happy. But maybe it wasn't love. Maybe it was something else. My heart ached as I listened to him. It was clear that Ed was grappling with feelings that he couldn't fully name yet, but they had already started to consume him. I leaned forward, gently probing. "Tell me about when you first noticed that something was off, Ed." He looked at me, a mixture of shame and confusion in his eyes. "I guess, it started when I noticed how easy it was for her to connect with other people. She would go to these gallery shows, meet new people, talk to everyone like she'd known them forever. At first, I was proud, you know. Proud that she was mine. But then I started thinking, why would she want to spend time with other guys if she was happy with me? I kept telling myself it was nothing, but it was always there, like this itch that wouldn't go away." He paused, took a deep breath, and pressed his fingers against his temples. "It sounds crazy, I know. I sound crazy. But I couldn't stop. Every time she'd go out, I'd sit there, just wondering who she was talking to, what they were doing. It drove me nuts. I kept imagining all these scenarios in my head, and I couldn't shut them off. I'd text her, call her, just to make sure she was where she said she'd be. And she'd always pick up. She'd always tell me where she was. But it never felt like enough. I could see the struggle on his face, the desperate search for control over emotions that had spiraled beyond his reach. There was something painfully human in the way he described it, like watching someone drown while clinging to an anchor they believed would save them. "It's like I was splitting in two," Ed continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "One part of me knew it was wrong. Knew that I shouldn't be feeling this way. But the other part, it just wouldn't stop. I thought maybe if I knew everything about what she was doing, I wouldn't feel so scared. But the more I tried to control things, the more I felt them slipping away. And I didn't know how to stop it." As he spoke, I sensed the deep loneliness beneath his words, the feeling that he was isolated not just from others, but from the very person he was trying to hold on to. His emotions were tangled in knots, pulling tighter with every memory he relived. Ed exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of his chair as if he needed something solid to hold on to. His fingers tensed, then relaxed, a silent battle playing out beneath his skin. "I should have known it wasn't normal," he muttered. "But it didn't feel wrong at the time. It felt necessary." He looked up at me then, eyes searching mine for something, understanding, maybe, or forgiveness. I wasn't here to judge him, only to help him untangle the knots in his mind. "Tell me more about that," I said. "When did the need to know everything start feeling like the only way to hold on to her?" Ed let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. "It crept up on me. At first, I was just curious. If she mentioned someone at a gallery, I'd ask a few questions, who they were, what they talked about. But then I started remembering their names. Not just remembering, keeping track. If she mentioned the same guy twice, my stomach would twist. I'd check his social media, see what kind of person he was, try to guess what she saw in him. And if she laughed too hard at some guy's joke, or leaned in too close at a party, that's when it would really start. The thoughts. The scenarios. The what-ifs. His leg bounced restlessly. One night, she was out late at some art event. I told myself I wouldn't text her, that I'd just wait until she got home. But as the hours went by, my mind started racing. What if she wasn't just at the gallery? What if she left with someone? What if? His voice caught in his throat. So I texted her. Just something casual, like, "Hey, having fun?" She didn't answer right away. And I swear, in those 10 minutes of silence, I lost my mind. I texted again. And again. By the time she finally responded, I was already outside, pacing in front of our building like some lunatic. When she got home, she looked at me like I was someone she didn't recognize. His hands curled into fists. She wasn't even mad at first. Just confused. She asked me why I was so worried, and I told her the truth, that I missed her, that I just wanted to make sure she was okay. But that wasn't really it, was it? I let the question linger in the air between us, giving him space to confront the answer on his own. I was trying to control something that wasn't mine to control, Ed admitted, voice raw. I wanted to own every part of her, even the parts that weren't meant for me. The way she smiled at other people, the way she existed in the world without me, it drove me insane. A heavy silence followed, and for a moment, the only sound was the faint hum of the heater in the corner. "Did she ever tell you how this made her feel?" I asked. Ed hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah," he whispered. "She told me once that she felt like she was losing herself. Like she had to be careful about what she said, who she talked to, because she never knew what would set me off. And the worst part is, I thought that meant she loved me." His breath hitched. "I thought if she was afraid of upsetting me, that meant I mattered more to her than those other guys. I told myself that's what love looked like, someone putting you first, even if it meant changing who they were. I didn't realize how much I was suffocating her until it was too late." His shoulders slumped, and he let out a long, tired sigh. "If I could go back," he said, almost to himself, "I'd do everything differently." Ed's fingers twitched as he stared at the floor, lost in the memory that was about to unfold. His breathing was shallow, uneven, as if just recalling the moment was pulling him back into it. "I don't even remember walking into that gallery," he muttered. "One second, I was outside, and the next. I was there, watching her." His hands clenched into fists, the knuckles turning white. It was packed, warm, loud, filled with that hum of people talking and glasses clinking. And there she was, standing near the center, surrounded by a group of people. But I only saw him. The curator. His jaw tensed. He was leaning in, talking close. And she was laughing. That kind of laugh that comes easy, the kind that says, I enjoy you. I like being here with you. It hit me like a punch to the gut. My ears started ringing. My vision blurred. And then I moved. His eyes flickered up to meet mine, wide, almost startled, as if he still couldn't believe what had happened next. I didn't think. I just walked right up to her. Right in the middle of her conversation. People were watching, but I didn't care. I grabbed her wrist, not hard, just enough to make her turn to me. And I said. He exhaled sharply. Are you serious? You're standing here, giggling like an idiot while I'm losing my mind? His voice cracked, and he let out a bitter laugh, shaking his head. She froze. At first, she just blinked at me, like she couldn't understand what I was saying. Then her face changed, confusion, then embarrassment, then anger. His body slumped forward, like the weight of that moment was still pressing down on him. She pulled her hand away. Stepped back. People had stopped talking. They were staring. I remember feeling my face burn, but I wasn't done. I kept going. I accused her, right there, in front of everyone. Asked her if she enjoyed stringing me along, making me look like a fool. Told her I knew exactly what she was doing. His voice dropped to a whisper. And she just stared at me. For a long time. Like she was seeing me for the first time. Like she realized, in that moment, that I wasn't the person she thought I was. Silence stretched between us. He swallowed hard. She said one thing before she walked away. Just one. His eyes were distant now, as if he could still hear the words echoing in his mind. I can't do this anymore. His lips parted, as if he wanted to say something else, but there was nothing left. Only regret. I wanted to run after her. Apologize. Beg. But I just stood there. And she left. His fingers curled into his palms, pressing into his skin like he was punishing himself for what he'd done. I ruined everything in one night. One moment. His breath was shaky, uneven. If I had just kept it together, if I had just trusted her, maybe she'd still be here. Ed's head hung low, his fingers interlocked as if he was trying to hold himself together. His breath was steady, but I could sense the turmoil beneath it, the quiet storm that hadn't fully settled. I thought she'd come back, he murmured. Even after she left that night, I told myself she just needed time. That she'd cool off, and we'd talk, and I'd explain everything, and she'd understand. His lips pressed together, his throat bobbing as he swallowed hard. But she didn't. His voice was hollow now, like he was still processing the finality of it. She didn't answer my calls. Didn't respond to my messages. At first, I told myself she just needed space. So I gave it to her. A day. 2 days. A week. He let out a dry, humorless laugh. But the longer she stayed away, the worse it got. I kept replaying everything in my head, picking apart every detail, every word I said. I convinced myself she was waiting for me to fix it. That if I could just say the right thing, she'd forgive me. So I kept trying. I wrote these long messages, apologizing, explaining, begging. She never answered. His hands curled into fists. Then one night, I saw her. His shoulders stiffened, his breath growing shallow. I was coming home late, and there she was, right outside our building. And for a second, I thought maybe she was there to see me. Maybe she was ready to talk. His eyes darkened, jaw tightening. But she wasn't alone. Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. There was a guy with her. I didn't recognize him. He wasn't touching her or anything, but they were laughing. And the way she looked at him, it was the way she used to look at me. His hands trembled, his whole body going rigid. I lost it. Walked right up to her. Didn't even think. Just started asking her why. Why she could laugh like that with someone else while I was falling apart. Why she was acting like I never mattered to her. Why she wouldn't even give me a chance to make things right. His chest rose and fell, his breath uneven. She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw it. Fear. Real fear. Like she didn't know what I was going to do. His voice broke, and for a moment, he just sat there, staring at his hands. She told me to stop. Said I was scaring her. And that. His throat tightened. That's when I knew it was over. Really over. Because I never wanted to be the person she was afraid of. His eyes met mine, filled with something raw, something broken. I walked away that night. I had to. I wanted to turn back, to tell her I wasn't that person, that I never meant to be. But I knew it didn't matter anymore. A deep breath, a slow exhale. She was done with me. Ed sat motionless, staring at his hands like they held all the answers he had been searching for. His breathing was steady now, quieter, but his eyes were filled with something else, acceptance, maybe. Or just exhaustion. I didn't know who I was without her, he admitted. For so long, my life revolved around her. Around us. Or at least, what I thought was us. His fingers traced invisible patterns on the fabric of his jeans. I kept thinking, if I had just done one thing differently, if I had just controlled my emotions, maybe she wouldn't have left. Maybe I wouldn't have lost her. His shoulders slumped forward. But the more I sat with it, the more I realized, this wasn't just about her. It was about me. The way I saw love. The way I thought needing someone meant owning them. His voice dropped, softer now, more introspective. I wasn't protecting our love. I was suffocating it. The weight of that truth settled in the air between us. It was the kind of realization that didn't come easily, the kind that took time to fully sink in. I wanted to reach out to her, one last time, Ed continued. Not to beg, not to fix things, but just to say. I understood. That I finally saw what I had done. That she had every right to walk away. His fingers curled inward, then released. But I didn't. Because I knew it wasn't about what I wanted anymore. A deep inhale, a slow exhale. So instead, I started working on myself. He leaned back in the chair, looking up at the ceiling for a moment before continuing. I started reading about relationships, about attachment, about how jealousy isn't really about the other person, it's about your own fears, your own insecurities. I went to therapy. I forced myself to sit with the uncomfortable truth that I wasn't just a guy who got too jealous sometimes. I was someone who let fear dictate my love. His eyes met mine, steadier than before. And that's not love. Silence stretched between us, but it wasn't heavy anymore. It was lighter, filled with something new. Growth. Understanding. I don't know if I'll ever get another chance with her, Ed said finally. And maybe I don't deserve one. But if I ever love someone again, I want to do it differently. I want to be someone who gives love, not someone who tries to cage it. His fingers tapped lightly against his knee, his expression unreadable. Maybe that's the only real way to love someone. If you've ever struggled with jealousy or control in a relationship, you're not alone. What do you think real love should look like? Drop a comment, I'd love to hear your thoughts.